Alright guys, in this video I'm going to talk to you about bias. A lot of times my students will tell me that they throw away a source as soon as they can detect that it has bias, which I take to mean that they think that if a source expresses any kind of opinion or shows any sort of preference, it's not reliable or useful. But that is not the case at all when we're doing research. I think what this shows is that often students have been taught that you can't use biased sources, but they haven't been taught what we really mean by bias. And so in this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what bias is and how you can detect it and what to do about it. Before I can really explain to you what bias is, I'm going to go ahead and first explain the political spectrum to you. Because in a lot of ways, when we're talking about bias, we're really talking about the political spectrum. Okay? Now, bear with me, this video is extremely low tech because if we were in class together, I'd be drawing on the board, but this is what I'm going to show you. Okay? So normally, when you see a scale like this to show the political spectrum, we have the left and the right. But really, when people are talking about the political spectrum, there's kind of two political spectrums that are collapsed into each other when we're talking about bias or the political spectrum. Okay, so I'm going to go over them with you. So in the United States, we call people not in the United States, in general, and even when we're talking about other countries' governments, we call people on the left liberals, okay? And we call people on the right conservatives. In the United States, the Liberal Party is called the Democrats, and in the United States, the Conservative Party is called Republicans. However, in Germany or Venezuela or in Nigeria, there will be a conservative party and they will have a different name. Now, since this is a sliding scale, you could plot the official platform of the Republican Party somewhere on this line, and you personally can have ideas that are more conservative or less conservative than the Republicans. You can have the Republicans be one place on this line and the Conservative Party in Germany be more conservative or less conservative than the Republican Party in the United States. This is a scale just to represent ideas and how extreme you feel about those ideas, okay? So the first line is basically the economy and how involved in the economy you think the United States government should be, or the government should be, I should say. Okay, if you're on the left, you believe that the government should be involved in the economy enough that they can provide basic services to people. So in general, people on the left are okay with higher taxes, and then the government gives us what we need. So for example, in the United States, school for K through 12 is free. And that is an idea that is on the left. If you believe college should also be free, you'd be a little bit more to the left. Maybe you believe healthcare should be free. That's a position on the left. You believe that you pay taxes and in exchange, the government gives every American certain basic things. The more you think the government should give you in exchange for taxes, the more left you're moving in your ideas. At the far extreme, you have communism, which is the idea that we give the government all of our money, and in exchange, they provide everything we need. So they take all the money and they meet all of our needs. But just because you're on the left does not mean you're even close to communism, okay? Just if you think there are certain services that the government should be in charge of in exchange for taxes, then you have ideas that are on the left. If you believe that instead of paying the government for these things, we should pay private companies for these things, then you have ideas that are on the right. So people on the right tend to want lower and lower taxes, and they want individual companies to have more and more control over our everyday needs, so that everything we need is bought and sold. Instead of the government giving it to us for free, we pay less taxes to the government and we pay private companies for this. So people on the right might say, no, we shouldn't have free school. We should always have to pay for school. And no, we shouldn't have private health care. We should pay insurance companies and things like that for our healthcare. People on the right also tend to want less regulation of companies. So, for example, people on the left would say it's the government's responsibility to protect us from pollution that a company might put in the water. So, government should pass rules for private businesses too, in addition to giving us basic needs. Those rules will protect us. People on the right say, no, those rules just stop businesses from making profit, so less regulation is better. At the far extreme of this, you have a completely free market, meaning no rules for any businesses. The only punishment they get for doing something bad is maybe losing their profit, and everybody has to buy all the things they need. Okay? So that is the scale, the political scale when it comes to the economy. That's generally the beliefs on the left and the right. Now, when it comes to individual rights, this is a slightly different scale. So when people on the left are asked, how do you feel about individual rights? People on the left generally believe that people should be allowed to do whatever they want to do with their own bodies, and they should be able to express themselves however they want to express themselves, and they should suffer no consequences from other people for expressing themselves or living their best selves or whatever. So people on the left might, for example, support marijuana legalization or abortion access or gay rights, transgender rights, people not being abused because of the color of their skin or their religion. In general, we want to protect each individual person, and even if they're very, very different than everybody else in society. Okay, people on the left generally think the government should only get involved to protect people's rights, but in general, the more left you move, the more you believe the government should just stay out of people's lives, and you move towards what's called anarchy, which just means no government involvement. However, when it comes to individual rights, people on the right value conformity, and they also value government regulation of individual people's lives. So they often not only don't agree with abortion, for example, they want to pass laws making it illegal. They not only don't agree with transgender, but they often want to pass laws punishing people for being transgender. They value conformity and the group of society more than the individual. Of course, you can be somewhere on this scale. If you don't really believe in access to abortion, but you're okay with it up to a certain point, you might be somewhere over here. Whereas if you believe in no abortion ever for any reason, you're moving further and further right. Okay? When you move to the extreme edge of the right, you are moving towards what we call totalitarianism, which is kind of the easier way to think of it is dictatorships, where the government tells you every single thing you can and cannot do. Okay? Now, I've represented this as 2 lines. In most cases, this is represented as 1 line because in general, in the United States, for example, the Republican Party does fall on the right in both of these issues, and the Democratic Party does fall on the left on both of these issues. So it's normally represented by 1 line. However, of course, an individual person like you could fall on the right when it comes to the economy and on the left when it comes to individual rights or something like that. People are dynamic. You might fall on the right when it comes to gun control and on the left when it comes to gay rights. You might have very complicated ideas about each position. You do not have to commit to one side or the other. Your beliefs are your beliefs. However, to try to represent how dynamic this is, people will often represent this chart as an X and Y axis. They'll flip this and show it like this. Okay, so let me bring in a cleaner version so you can see it. Okay, and it would look something like this. And the idea is that people who are on the left when it comes to the economy, how much the government should provide our basic services, and how much the government should let us do whatever we want to do, you might be here. If you're on the left when it comes to how much the government should help us get our basic needs, but you do believe that the government should have control over what people can and can't do with their bodies, you might be somewhere in here. okay? So it's just a dynamic way of showing that everybody doesn't have simple opinions on all topics. Just to show you how different things can be. If you believe the government should control every aspect of the economy and provide everybody's needs, and the government should control people's individual choices about what they can and can't do, at the extreme, you have communist dictatorship. Okay, and on the other side of things, if you believe that the government should control everything about people's individual choices and value the masses over the individual, but you believe in a free market, at an extreme, you have a Nazi party, basically. Okay, so this helps you understand the relationship between major historical parties and events, too, when you think about it this way. Most Americans are nowhere near that extreme. Most Americans fall somewhere towards the middle. Okay, so we are nowhere near Nazis and communist dictatorships, but we have complex ideas about different topics. Okay, now back to the simple left versus right. Okay, this middle position is not neutral in the sense that it's not a 0 on a pH scale, right? It's impossible to maintain this position. It just basically marks the spot at which you switch from a conservative idea to a liberal idea. But you can't actually stay here because you are going to have personal beliefs that are going to pull you one way or the other, okay? And that's okay. And that's what we often mean when we're referring to bias. If most Americans are somewhere in here, bias refers to whether I can sense which side you're on and which side you're trying to pull me towards. But bias does not have to mean that you are factually inaccurate, okay? So, for example, if we're debating a topic, your personal beliefs and experiences may make you value certain facts more than other facts. So, for example, just to use a random example, gun control. If when you hear about gun control, stories of gun violence, you think, I don't want any more school children to die because of mass shootings. If what you hear that sticks out to you is, I don't want any more school children to die, that's sort of a liberal concern, and it's not factually inaccurate that school children are dying. Okay? It doesn't mean you're spreading lies because you have a bias. Whereas somebody conservative, they may hear a story about a mass shooting, about the government considering regulations for guns, and maybe they grew up in a family where they hunted a lot and they have a lot of very pleasurable experiences around guns, and they grew up in a family that really valued the Second Amendment, and they say, I don't care so much that school children are dying, I'm more worried that the government's going to take my guns away. It is not factually inaccurate that the Second Amendment exists. It is not factually inaccurate that if we did pass some gun control laws, some people would have less access to guns. So it doesn't mean they're lying, it just means their personal beliefs and values are sometimes telling them what is more important to focus on in a debate, okay? As long as Americans stay sort of in this area, we can have really meaningful debates about topics. And when you're reading a news source or a book or an article that you can kind of sense, oh, I think this one kind of falls on this side, you're okay as long as you feel like most of the information is factually accurate. The problem is when you start to get way out in left field or right field, where you start to realize this source is so liberal that it's basically conspiracy theories because they care more about proving that the liberal side is the right side than they do about actually solving the problem. Okay, and the same thing on the other side. If you are much more concerned with proving that the Democratic candidate for president is evil and you're willing to make up any story you can to prove that part on the right, then you're in conspiracy theories or so on and so forth, okay? So you have to be careful of biased sources that have more bias in them than fact. However, you cannot find a source that has zero bias. Even when we're not talking about political bias, okay? Even when we're talking about a scientific paper, I used this example in class once. If two people are debating how to solve an issue related to climate change, and one's arguing that one solution is better and the other one's arguing that the other solution is better, maybe one of them is biased towards the quicker solution and the other one is biased towards the cheaper solution. That doesn't mean that they're lying about their solution. It doesn't mean that the way they explain their solution is false. It just means that they have a belief that is theirs that is influencing the way they're seeing the problem, okay? And when you're reading news sources, the ways they can be biased is to maybe they have unflattering photos, maybe they use language in ways that tell you what side they're on. For example, do they refer to them as protesters or rioters? Do they refer to them as revolutionaries or thugs? Those kinds of things will tell you kind of what side they're trying to be on. Then there's emphasis. If I keep emphasizing a point, even if it's factually accurate, maybe emphasizing that point is trying to get you to see that point as more valuable. And if you see that point as more valuable, that might pull you to the left or the right on the issue. Then there's also what is being left out. In the beginning of the semester, I used the example of I tell you person X killed person Y. If I say person X killed person Y, you might say, well, person X is a horrible person. But if I then tell you, well, hold on now. Before person X killed person Y did all these horrible things to person X. Then you say, oh, you know what? Never mind. Person Y was the bad person and deserved to get killed. If I don't tell you the whole story, even if it's factually accurate to say person X killed person Y, if I'm not telling you the whole story, I might be trying to influence the way you see it, and I might be trying to pull you to one side of the issue. Again, bias is not the greatest thing in the world, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. What you need to do when you're reading sources on a topic is get to the point where you can sense, is this article very, very, very close to neutral? Or is this article a little bit conservative? And if it's a little bit conservative, but mostly factual, you can use it, but now try to go find one that's a little bit liberal. Because if you think of this as the conservative one is going to go over the facts that are important to conservatives, that means all those facts that are important to liberals have not been covered. So you want to find one that's a little bit conservative and one that's a little bit liberal and balance them out. Of course, you want to always try to stay as close as you can to the center, of this issue. But if you have to go out a little bit, just recognize the bias and try to balance it out. If you read a source that's clearly all the way out here on how conservative or how liberal they are, then you know it's trash, okay? So bias by itself is not a bad thing. Extreme bias means it's trash, okay? And if you recognize the bias, which you should do as an effective researcher, you want to balance that bias out by finding a source that's biased in the opposite direction so that you get all the facts, all the angles on the issue, and you can make the most informed decision. And then after you've had all the facts, then you can decide which ones are most important to you personally. But if you don't have all the facts, whatever position you take on the issue will be based on only partial facts. Okay? We'll talk a little bit about this in class.